Jim, thanks for joining us today. Kiera and I are going to pick your brain today. We want to know a little bit about turnaround and restructuring services that EDSI provides. We want to tap into your wisdom, and we want to learn about some of these terminologies and things that didn't make a lot of sense to us at first. Does that sound like a good plan?
Sounds great. Looking forward to it.
All right. In the interest of time, we're going to dive right in. Uh, But one term that we hear a lot as it relates to turnaround or restructuring services is just this concept of distress. What does it mean, or what might people be trying to communicate when they say a company is in distress? And then take us down that line of what are some common causes for a company becoming distressed?
Sure. Yeah. So distress typically implies that there's some financial condition or financial pressure, right? It might be that sales have been declining, profits have been declining, maybe they've become losses, but the typical metric that we look at is cash flow.
Okay.
And if they're burning cash and they're getting to the point where they're going to run out of cash and credit, then they're distressed. And that's when they need to make some radical changes to make sure that the company survives.
Perfect.
Awesome. And then would you be able to walk us through like what are some of the early warning signs that indicate a company is heading towards distress even before the financials might clearly show it?
Sure. And obviously the financials, you do see some things that may not show distress, like sales going down, profits declining on a trending basis. And then something that's more subtle in the financials is when the gross margin starts to erode.
Hmm.
And gross margin is basically your sales minus your cost of goods sold. And that's sort of a lot of times people just look at that as the operating profit of the company. And it's a really core measure of profitability. But when gross margin starts to erode, it's an indication that something is going on in the marketplace. Either there's a price war and prices are going down, or maybe your material costs are going up, or your labor costs are going up, and you have not been able to recoup that in the price of the product or service that you're selling. So that gross margin, I always say, is the canary in the coal mine. If you see something going on with gross margin that's negative, then that's an early indicator that you will see in your financials. But some of the other things that we see, oftentimes we'll see quality issues, and quality issues will begin to lead to real issues financially. Those quality issues can be in the service or in the product. We'll also see organizational issues. If there's turnover with staff, high levels of turnover, that's a warning sign. If there's turnover of executive level staff or high level staff, that's really a big warning sign. And if you lose a bunch of salespeople, that's oftentimes the beginning of something really bad that's going to happen for an organization.
Okay. Doesn't sound like gooey, awesome stuff, but the good thing is we have experts like you, Jim. So we're gonna kind of move in a little bit now, like getting into the work. All right.
Okay.
So now a company has unfortunately become distressed, right? They're seeing some of those warning signs.
Yeah.
You know, what does a typical 30-day priority plan look like? When you step into that company and you see that distress, it's time to turn that company around, see what you can do. What are some of the things that in that first 30 days you're really trying to accomplish?
Yeah. There's really two things that have to happen right away. The first thing is you have to kind of assess the situation. What's going on? Why has the company kind of become distressed or gone off the rails, right? And that's looking at everything from key processes to each of the functions to what's going on in terms of financials, et cetera. So that has to happen. But in parallel with that, you have to create some cash forecasts so you can really assess, where are they from a cash standpoint? Are they burning cash? How much time do they have left? Which is really what that cash forecast tells you. So those two things have to happen very quickly. And then once you kind of have the cash forecast in place and you can assess how much time they have left and you've done your analysis, then you put together a turnaround plan.
Awesome.
Cool. And then kind of bouncing off of that, would you be able to tell us some of the most common leadership mistakes or successes that you see during a crisis, and then how do you address them typically?
Yeah, the most common leadership mistakes I see are A, they don't make decisions when they should be making decisions, right? They think it's just naturally going to get better and they hope it's going to get better and it doesn't, right? So that's a huge issue. I also see leaders not bringing their team into it to work with them. A lot of times you'll have people that just try to do it all themselves, and that's a bad idea because your team can bring a lot of different things to the table in terms of what's working and not working, and so you have to be open and listen to them. I also see a lot of business owners. Look, they got into business for a reason, and unless their business is financial in nature, they're generally not financial people.
Okay.
And so what happens is they run the business and they do their thing, and as long as cash flow is okay and they're able to make payroll and pay themselves and all of that, they just kind of go on like, that's their world. But they really do not analyze their financials very well on a regular basis. And when I say regular, monthly basis. And all of a sudden, so they won't see some of the long-term degradation that's going on, and it won't become obvious to them until they start to have a cash flow issue. So those are just some of the big issues. There's probably a fourth that we see pretty commonly in small and mid-sized companies, and that is there's been a transition, right, from maybe one generation of leadership to the next, or one owner to the next, or one key leader to the next. And it's usually the interfamily stuff when it transfers from generation one to two. There's a very high failure rate. If a successful company that's been around 10 plus years or more, and if they transition to generation two, 50% of those companies fail within the first 5 years.
Wow.
And when they go to generation three, it's 80 to 90% fail in the first 5 years, which is unbelievable, right? So with the mistake that's made there is that the successor is not properly trained for that role. And oftentimes they're just thrown into a role that they're not ready for and they fail.
It's interesting.
Yeah, those statistics are crazy to think
Yeah.
about from a family
Yeah.
business standpoint, and
Mhm.
how important it is for that knowledge transfer that, that training to take place. And I can see that sometimes that might get a little bit sticky with family. So
Right.
it makes
Yeah.
sense once you say the statistics, but I could have never guessed any of those. So
Yeah.
thanks for sharing that.
No worries.
Uh, right. I mean, I think you talked about the financials as kind of like those are those lagging indicators, right? You see the
Mhm.
financials, maybe you see them on a monthly basis, at least, as you said, could be quarterly. What about some of those metrics or KPIs that you rely on most when you're in it? When that turnaround's in process, how do you know that it's working?
Mhm.
I heard cash flow, but is there anything else that you would talk about from a, again, metric or KPI that you're really tracking closely to know you're having success?
Sometimes, well, it can be a number of things. I mean, cash flow is always huge, right?
Yeah.
That's always the thing. It's like the heartbeat of the company. It's always going to be the thing that's going to be watched very, very closely. So if you're looking for key metrics, your gross margin, is it starting to improve? Typically, when we create a turnaround plan, in the plan, there might be very specific changes that need to happen. And so those are the things that we're watching. And it varies from one company to the next in terms of what those changes are. So there isn't a common metric, but there's also another set of metrics, which is from the bank. And the bank typically has general covenants or rules that you have to abide by when you borrow money from them. So you also watch the covenants. It might be what is your debt to equity ratio, right? How much debt do you have relative to how much equity do you have in the company? So there might be different ratios that the bank is looking at that you often have to pay close attention to so that you don't really trip more covenants and get into deeper trouble with your bank.
It's almost like our question list here, Jim. We have banking as the next area that
Ah,
we're going to dive into.
What does it mean exactly when a company is not bankable? And then when a company is unbankable, where would they go for financing?
oh, that's a good question because that happens a lot. right? A company is considered unbankable when they are losing money, they have negative cash flows. So if I have a company, right, and I want to go find a new bank, and if I go to that bank and say, oh, I've been around for 30 years, but I haven't made money for the last year and a half, they're going to say to me, well, geez, Jim, we would love to be your bank because that's how they typically are. And then they're going to say, well, send us your financials. And then when they see that you're losing money, they're going to say, we absolutely will bank you as soon as you can show us a track record of profitability, which is typically at least a year of profitability. So you kind of get to a point where you become unbankable because you're not performing financially. And what that means is you have to go to what we would call a non-conventional bank, like an asset-based lender. We call them ABLs. And an asset-based lender, their specialty is lending into riskier situations, right? Their specialty is lending into situations where a company maybe is losing money, hasn't made money in a while, but they have lots of assets as collateral. So, for example, I might have a company where maybe I only need to borrow $1 million, right, for my line of credit, and I can run my business on that. But I might have a building that's worth 5 million that I've paid off, and I might have accounts receivable of a 500,000, and I might have inventory of another 500,000. So I actually have a bunch of assets that are really valuable, but they're not liquid. But I can use them as collateral to borrow from an asset-based lender.
Awesome.
Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I'm not sure that companies, love to be in that situation, and it's great to have an expert like you who could help them to navigate what those options are to get that company back on track.
And Casey and Kiera, most business owners, don't have a clue what unbankable means. They don't have a clue, but for no wrong of their own, right? It's just not one of those things you learn until you have to go through it. Most don't even know that ABLs exist, right? And there's dozens of ABLs in the United States, asset-based lenders.
Okay.
And so they don't know that they're there. And they're more expensive. The rates are higher, the fees are higher. You want to avoid it if you can, but they're also the lifeline for a lot of companies. So I've worked with many, many ABLs that were the perfect bridge to get a company from that period of time where they're losing money to back when they're making money again. So they're very legitimate businesses, and they play an important part in the financial ecosystem for businesses. But most business owners really don't know what they are.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for sharing that one. Let's move into just a little bit more of kind of some wisdom, some advice, right? For those people who are trying to avoid this situation. Let's start there, right? Like, what's the sage advice that we have to say? Obviously, a company would love to never be making this call about,
Right.
turnaround and restructuring services.
Yeah.
And that's just not the case. Like, I don't think people should feel that's been an important part of your career and others who really help to save jobs, help businesses get back on track. What advice would you have for somebody who's trying to avoid that? And maybe what advice would you have for somebody who's struggling with the fact that that's where their business is at today?
Yeah. Okay. So I always tell people it's never too soon to create a turnaround plan, but it's often too late.
Mhm.
So, if you start to sense that things are really going sideways, bring in a professional, right? Because people like myself have gone through hundreds of these, and the average business owner has never gone through it. So and the average business owner, a lot of times 90 or 95% of their wealth is tied up in that company. So the risk, if they lose that company, is a devastating financial impact for that person and their family and et cetera. So what I find is it's generally ego is the thing that stops business owners from bringing in professionals. It's like, who's going to tell me how to run my business? I know my business better than anybody else. Nobody is going to come in here and tell me how to do it, what to do. And frankly, oftentimes, right, you have this natural selection, which people that start businesses and that run businesses love the fact that they are the ones making the decisions. They like their autonomy. They don't want somebody to tell them. Otherwise, they would have stayed in a corporate job for their whole career, right? So it's a very difficult ask, but at the same time, when they think about it logically, because of so much of their wealth and their own identity is tied up maybe in their company, it's super important that they get help. Hey, if you need an attorney, you go get an attorney. If you need to see a doctor, you go see a doctor, right? If your business needs help, get a turnaround consultant to help you out because they can walk you through it and help you avoid the mistakes that most business owners make in the process.
Crystal ball is out now. As you look at the economy, right, and kind of
Mhm.
the state of where we're at today as we are recording this message, uh, how do you feel? I feel like this can be a little bit of a cyclical kind of
Mhm.
industry, right? We can be in boom, and of course that can be from industry to
Yep.
industry, company to
Yeah.
company. Um, do you anticipate more companies will need intervention in the coming years, the coming months? How are you feeling today?
I think so. From a cyclicality standpoint, we are overdue for a recession. And recessions drive turnaround work. Um, it's been a weird period of time. There's so much uncertainty out there. I mean, you have issues going on internationally. You have a tariff situation that just continues to bounce around the place. And so what we're seeing is a lot of companies are not making some of the capital expenditures that they should be making, and that's going to start to flow through to the suppliers and some of the other companies. So we have policies that are unstable in Metro Detroit. It's very difficult for the automotive-based companies to pick a direction and a strategy and go after it when the rules keep changing underneath them. And they've literally for 2 years now, they're kind of going all over the place. So it's become really difficult for them to plant a flag and say, we're going this way. So there's a lot of uncertainty there. So I see that is driving some more uncertainty and distress with companies. But then there's another thing going on, which is we have so much change going on in terms of technology and all of these people that are perceiving that AI is going to revolutionize the way we do business. And I think it will, over the next decade, have a significant impact on a lot of companies. The downside is there's going to be winners and losers. So
Mm.
there's going to be industries, if they're not strategically planning and looking forward at trends and really being progressive, we're going to see a lot of companies just fail. We're going to see some industries just go away. So we have to be super cautious as business owners that we're really looking at the trends and what's happening in the future. Otherwise, you could be like a Blockbuster Video, right? I mean, look at Blockbuster and Netflix. If you go back 25 years, there were blockbusters. You couldn't, throw a baseball without hitting a blockbuster, and they're gone today, right? Because Netflix looked at the future and they had a better model and they planned for the future. And there's so much change going on now that companies just have to be really diligent about strategic planning and making sure they have a good game plan for the future.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. Let's just end it here with one, quick question. You can reiterate anything that you've said already. There's been so much richness in this conversation, so thank you. Um, for a company who is struggling, though, what's one next best step that they might take, Jim? What advice or next step could you offer to their leadership team?
Well, I mean, get some help, right? Get some help from a professional that has been down this path before. But the other thing is make sure you have good financial monitoring tools in place, right? Build a 13-week cash forecast. A 13-week cash forecast is the standard tool for cash forecasting. Every banker that if you ever get into distress, they're going to ask you for that. So build a 13-week cash forecast and start to manage your cash flows, measure them, watch them, and manage them. That's a great starting point for anybody. Those two things will get you going will help you to start moving in the right direction.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you. We couldn't appreciate your time anymore. Thanks for sharing your wisdom, your sage advice, and some of kind of those practical definitions with us that were a little bit challenging for Kiera and I as we first looked at, all the great work that you do. I think you helped a lot of people understand some new things about this work, and hopefully they heard what I heard, which was, right, take the ego, put that out the door. If your company is struggling, the same way that we have professionals in other areas of our life, when we need to call upon for help, should be no different for a company. So we appreciate you, Jim. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
And great questions, guys. Take care.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Jim.